the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox, ahead of this potentially crucial day. Good morning to you, Mr. Fox.
Good morning.
Let's talk about the amendments today. One in particular we're focusing on, and that's the Sir Graham Brady amendment, which, for those who need a little reminding, it requires the backstop to be replaced with alternative arrangements. The government's backing this amendment. Was Cabinet consulted on this?
We had a meeting, in fact, of the whole parliamentary party last night. There was a very strong feeling that this amendment does the two things that we want to do. First of all, that we leave the European Union and we leave it with a deal so that there's minimal disruption to the United Kingdom and to our European partners, but also that the United Kingdom gets an alternative insurance policy that guarantees no hard border in Ireland, but not the one that's in place at the moment. And the reason for that is there's a fear amongst many that if the current arrangements were put in place, the UK could find itself actually trapped in a customs union by default, and that's not acceptable, clearly, to a large part of the House of Commons, as we saw from the result last week. So Sir Graham Brady's amendment sets out that we would seek an alternative that produced the same effective outcome for the Irish situation.
Couple of flies in the ointment for the Prime Minister, potentially. Of course, the Speaker of the House, John Bercow, has to choose this amendment that's been tabled to go through to a vote. And also, you do wonder that this alternative to the backstop this amendment mentions hasn't actually been worked out. The alternative arrangements aren't written down. There is no idea as to what they would be. Brexiteers like Boris Johnson, Jacob Rees-Mogg already saying it's not good enough. So this could be another day, another majority for absolutely nothing.
Well, you're quite right, and MPs really need to tune into the voters, and the voters, I think, are telling us that whether they voted Leave or Remain, they actually think we should carry out the results of the referendum, number one, and number two, that we should get on with it and do it. And I think that there's a frustration out there that this is not happening. And I think that people want us to respect that result of the referendum, but they want us to do it in an orderly way.
How likely do you think it is that you can get on with it today? Because that's exactly the phrasing of a tweet I received earlier this morning when we said you were coming on, and have you got any questions for the International Trade Secretary, Liam Fox? And somebody simply put, get on with it. How likely is that to happen today? Because we could find ourselves at the end of the day back to square one.
Well, I think it's very important that MPs understand the importance of the vote today, and to give the Prime Minister the momentum and give her the backing to go back to the European Union and say, this is what Parliament will agree to if you will make some adjustments to what we have. What some of our MPs, you mentioned some of them, will be looking to see is that would any change to the backstop be legally binding? Would the government be willing to see the opening up of the withdrawal agreement itself to ensure that that was possible? The answer to that question is yes. And we, therefore, it's up to the House of Commons now to decide, can we give the Prime Minister the backing so that she can go to the European Union and say, look, we all want to leave the European Union in an orderly way. Britain has a legal right to do so under the European treaties. Can we do this in a way that suits us all? It's still possible for us to do that, but the House of Commons needs to understand that it's got a duty to provide the mechanism by which we can do it.
OK, let's talk about this leaked document last night, this so-called Tory peace plan agreement that's been drawn up by two extremes of opinion within the party on an alternative plan to the Prime Minister. Things got so fractious that you actually need a peace plan devised by MPs rather than the Cabinet and the Prime Minister.
Well, MPs have a duty to ensure that we carry out what we promised the people, which was that we would honour the result of the referendum. 80% of the MPs in the House of Commons on both sides promised to respect the result of the referendum. And it's also a question for Labour backbenchers in this debate tonight, because how much do they want to honour that? Many Labour MPs are sitting in constituencies with very heavy Leave votes. Do they really want to try to frustrate the will of the people for party political advantage? It's not just a Conservative debate. There are lots of ideas around, but none of these ideas can be considered properly unless we are able to get an agreement from the European Union and we're able to give the Prime Minister the backing she needs tonight. If she doesn't get the backing to go back to Europe with an idea of how we resolve the backstop issue and how we guarantee no hard border in Ireland, but at the same time respecting the result of the referendum, then you're right, we could be no further forward.
OK, well, we will be getting a Labour point of view from Tony Lloyd, the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, a little bit later on in the programme. Just want to show you the front page of the Daily Mirror, which I'm sure you've seen. It's quite dramatic. No deal, no meal. This is the British Retail Consortium writing a letter to the government, backed by big retail giants like Lidl, McDonald's, Asda, Sainsbury's, saying that if there is no deal, there is a real chance of food shortages in shops up and down the high street.
Well, of course, the UK has a strong food security policy in place. We have strong domestic production. Our retailers are able to source from a very wide range of international produce.
But do you agree with this warning? Because obviously it's talking about potential tariffs that will come into play, the delay on goods crossing the channel, which civil servants have made an assessment on, and it could be, you know, weeks. Do you agree with this warning?
Well, I think it's way over the top, but then that's what you expect in the tabloid press. In terms of food prices, of course, they're...
Hang on a second. So you know better than the British Retail Consortium that represents the likes of Sainsbury's, Asda, Costcutter, Co-op, Pret, Waitrose, M&S, Lidl, McDonald's. I could go on, but we haven't got enough time. You know better than all of those retail giants who put food on our plates every day of the week.
What I'm saying is that they all accept that we have strong food security. They are saying there may be, especially in some fresh produce, some disruption, but to say no deal, no meal is way over the top. But again, that's tabloid. That's a tabloid newspaper headline, not the consortium's headline.
OK,
food prices.
I'll read what the consortium said then. I'll take it away from the headline. They said even if the UK government doesn't undertake checks on products at the border, there will still be major disruption. You said some disruption. They said major disruption at Calais, as the French government has said it will enforce sanitary and custom checks on exports from the EU, which will lead to long delays. They've said, as prudent businesses, we are stockpiling where possible, but all frozen and chilled storage is already being used, and there's very little general warehousing space available in the UK. That's not tabloid headlines. That's an assessment, a damage assessment that's been carried out by the British Retail Consortium on behalf of all of those big retailers.
OK, so you showed me a tabloid headline and said, did I agree with it? And I don't agree with it. I think it's over the top. Are there potential problems with no deal? Yes, there are. Are there mitigations for those? Yes, there are. For example, you mentioned food prices. Food prices are determined by a lot of things, including whether the UK would apply tariffs in the case of no deal, and the government would have discretion on doing that. Would retailers have the ability to source from other places? Yes, of course they would, because they would get warning of
yes
no deal.
Yes or no, will there be food shortages? Again, I go back to that letter. We are extremely concerned that our customers will be among the very first to experience the realities of a no-deal Brexit.
So the best thing to do is to avoid a no-deal Brexit. And that's what we have the opportunity to do today. I want us to leave the European Union.
But it is a possibility. So I'm just trying to put in perspective for people at home. They're hearing this from the British Retail Consortium. They want confirmation from the government. The no-deal option is very real at the moment, as are various other options.
Well, it is real. And, you know, people who are watching should be putting pressure on their members of parliament to ensure we don't end up in that situation. It's possible for us to leave the European Union.
So many of the viewers say we want a no deal. What are the consequences? Is one of the consequences food shortages? I just want a yes or no answer.
There's all sorts of possible disruptions with no deal, which is why I don't want to see it, and the government doesn't want to see it. We want to leave the European Union in an orderly way, and today MPs from both parties across the House have a chance to ensure that that happens. We have a responsibility, not in Parliament to do what we want. We have a responsibility to do what's good for the country. The public have given us an instruction to leave the EU. We have to do it in a way that causes least disruption across all sectors in our economy.
OK, International Trade Secretary Liam Fox, thank you very much for your time here on Sky News Sunrise, ahead of that big day in Parliament.